What happens when a sharp-tongued barista dares to challenge a billionaire CEO and accidentally changes both their lives? In a city where coffee is currency and power plays happen over oat milk lattes, one unexpected rivalry brews into something far more dangerous and intimate. But behind every perfect cup lies a secret, and behind every smirk a scar. Love, betrayal, ambition, and a deal neither of them saw coming. Subscribe to our YouTube channel now and be the first to watch this slow burn, enemies to lovers roller coaster where control meets chaos and sparks more than just conversation. The morning bustle of New York was already in full swing when Chloe Bell unlocked the doors of Bean and Soul, her hands expertly balancing two trays of fresh pastries while nudging the door open with her hip. The smell of roasted beans greeted her like a familiar friend, rich, bitter, and grounding. This was her rhythm now: open at 6, close at 3, and try not to let the past catch up in between. Chloe had never imagined herself behind a coffee bar. Once she'd walked through the glass doors of a prestigious university with dreams of financial strategy and Wall Street dominance. She had a mind for numbers, a gift for patterns that professors had called her CEO material. But that was another life, back before the letters came, back before the house was taken. It had started with her father's layoff, then a string of unpaid bills, and finally, a cold, official letter from a bank whose name she'd once admired. Within weeks, the home she grew up in was auctioned off. Her mother, broken and anxious, moved in with relatives upstate. Chloe, drowning in guilt and disillusionment, dropped out of her third year of finance school. The system she had once wanted to be a part of had shown its teeth, and she wanted no part in it anymore. So here she was, 3 years later, wearing a black apron over a soft hoodie, sleeves pushed up, hands busy crafting espresso drinks for customers who didn't know or care about her past. She had learned to find peace in the hiss of steaming milk and the smooth pour of a well-balanced flat white. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. "Morning, Chloe," called Jesse, her coworker and close friend, as he stepped inside, flipping his beanie off and shaking out his curly hair. "You're late," she smirked, not even glancing up as she calibrated the grinder. Fashionably, also the Q train was acting like a diva again. She chuckled under her breath, finishing the setup of the pastry case. Croissants, scones, and a few vegan banana loaves lined up neatly like well-behaved children. The bell over the door chimed softly. A regular customer walked in, already glued to his phone. Chloe greeted him with a smile that reached her eyes but not her heart. This was the dance: kindness on the surface, distance underneath. Despite everything, Chloe liked Bean and Soul. The place had character. Plants hung in macrame holders from the ceiling. The walls were mismatched brick and reclaimed wood, and a huge blackboard behind the counter was scrawled with chalk quotes like "First, coffee, then the world." In some small way, working here helped her heal. She wasn't saving the world, but she wasn't harming it either. She was surviving, moving forward one cappuccino at a time. But deep inside, the old fire hadn't quite gone out, and the universe, ever dramatic, was about to throw someone into her path who'd challenge everything she thought she'd left behind. At precisely 7:59 a.m., the bell above the cafe door chimed again, sharp, punctual, like clockwork. Chloe didn't have to look up to know who it was. She recognized the distinct sound of polished Italian leather shoes against the worn hardwood floor, followed by the faint rustle of an expensive wool coat. He always walked in with the same cadence, the same commanding presence, like someone who wasn't just entering a coffee shop, but inspecting a new acquisition. "Sebastian King." She exhaled slowly through her nose, already reaching for the double shot of espresso. She'd prepped the second she'd heard the bell. He approached the counter, eyes scanning his phone, a Bluetooth headset tucked in one ear. His navy suit was immaculately tailored, his hair slicked back in a way that suggested effortlessness but screamed 5 different styling products. Without looking up, he spoke. "Medium oat latte, 135 degrees, no foam. Chloe arched an eyebrow as she began steaming the milk. You know, one day you might want to live a little and risk 136. Sebastian glanced up for the briefest moment. That would imply a lapse in standards, he said dryly, and returned to scrolling through what looked like an aggressive email thread. Jesse, passing by behind her, whispered under his breath, "Mr. Robot strikes again." Chloe bit back a laugh, watching the thermometer with the vigilance of a neurosurgeon. 132, 133, 134, and stop. A perfect 135 degrees F. She poured the drink into the matte black to-go cup and slid it across the counter. Sebastian took it without thanks, took a sip, always the same small sip, and paused. Chloe watched him, arms crossed. Finally, he nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Then he turned and left without another word. "I swear," Jesse said as soon as the door shut behind him, "if he ever cracks a full smile, the universe might collapse in on itself." "What's the opposite of a tip?" Chloe muttered, "because that's what he gives." Yet despite the friction, despite the air of superiority and the 0.0 human warmth he gave off, there was something about Sebastian King that Chloe couldn't shake. Maybe it was the way he never missed a day, never changed his order, never lost his temper, even when the line was long or the milk was 2 degrees off. He was cold, yes, but not unkind. He was distant, yes, but never rude. It was like watching someone perform the role of a functioning adult with such precision that it bordered on obsession. Every movement calculated, every breath measured. And what Chloe didn't know, what no one at Bean and Soul could guess, was that Sebastian's obsessive need for control wasn't born from arrogance. It came from fear. In the echo chambers of his penthouse apartment, he sometimes woke in the middle of the night, heart racing, mind spiraling over numbers, deals, meetings, failures that hadn't even happened. Diagnosed with generalized anxiety in his early 20s, Sebastian had learned to weaponize control as a coping mechanism. His routines weren't just habits, they were lifelines. And the oat latte at 135 degrees F. It wasn't a coffee order. It was the illusion of order in a world that felt constantly on the verge of unraveling. It was a Wednesday. Rain tapped gently against the foggy front windows of Bean and Soul, casting the interior in soft gray light. Chloe had arrived early, already soaked from her walk-in, her ponytail dripping slightly under her hoodie. Jessie had called in sick with food poisoning, though she strongly suspected it was just a Tinder date hangover, leaving her to handle the early rush alone. By 7:55 a.m., she was operating like a one-woman army. Her hands moved fast, juggling croissants, receipts, espresso shots, and the occasional apology to cranky commuters. The line snaked close to the door, and Chloe could feel her stress building, one sharp inhale at a time. Then the bell rang. 7:59 a.m., as usual. Sebastian King stepped in, dry and immaculate as ever, a dark umbrella folded neatly in his hand. He didn't look at the line. He didn't acknowledge the chaos. He simply stepped up to the front like the world owed him a fast pass. Chloe, still grinding beans, shot him a look. "Good morning," she said flatly, not meaning it. "Medium oat latte," he said. 135 degrees, no foam. "You don't say," she muttered. He blinked just once, then looked at her with that dispassionate gaze of his. The kind that somehow managed to make people feel invisible and under a microscope at the same time. Chloe inhaled sharply through her nose and turned to steam the milk. But something about the morning, the pressure, the line, the rain, her soaked socks, twisted the tension inside her into something sharp. She turned back and handed him the cup. "Here," she said, "exactly 135 degrees, because God forbid it's 136 and the universe collapses into a black hole." Sebastian stared at the cup, then at her. A beat of silence passed. Then he raised one brow. "Precision prevents chaos," he said, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. She leaned in slightly, her voice low and laced with sarcasm. "If you ever figure out how to control the temperature of life, let me know. I'll buy the patent." There was an audible gasp from someone in the line. A regular, the woman with the purple headphones, slowly lowered her cup, eyes wide. Another customer glanced between Chloe and Sebastian like they were watching a tennis match. And then the unexpected happened. Sebastian King smiled. Not a full smile, not the kind that cracked his carefully constructed exterior, but a twitch at the corner of his lips, just enough to be unmistakable. Chloe froze. Did she break him? Did she just win? He looked at her for a long second, almost amused, then took a sip of his latte. 135, he said. Perfect. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving behind a stunned silence and a room full of people now pretending not to be eavesdropping. One guy near the pastry case whispered, "Holy shit." Chloe just stood there blinking. What the hell was that? And why underneath all the irritation was she smiling too? The next morning he came back. Same time, same order, same suit, although Chloe swore the tie was a slightly different shade of navy. This time he didn't just order, he made eye contact, intentional lingering. "Good morning," he said. Chloe narrowed her eyes slightly, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Nothing came, just that. A genuine good morning, not robotic, not distracted. She blinked in confusion, then turned to prepare his latte as if nothing had happened. The following day, he came back again. And the day after that. Each time there was a new addition, a question, a comment, a sarcastic quip that flirted dangerously with being charming. "Busy this morning?" he asked once, glancing at the long line stretching out the door. "No, we just like to create lines to build anticipation," Chloe replied dryly, without looking up from the espresso machine. Another morning, as she handed him his latte, he raised it slightly in mock salute. "You ever think about going into chemistry? Your milk-to-espresso ratios are suspiciously accurate." She stared at him. "You know you've got a terrifying way of complimenting people, right?" "I prefer the term efficiently communicative." By the end of the week, their back and forth had become a feature of the cafe, as much a part of the morning as the smell of coffee and the whirring of grinders. Jessie, now fully recovered and back on shift, leaned against the pastry case like a spectator at a reality show. "You two need subtitles," he muttered one day as he watched them spar over whether cinnamon belonged in cappuccinos. Even the regulars noticed. A teenage girl started recording their exchanges for a TikTok series she titled Latte Wars. An older couple near the window whispered bets on whether they'd start dating or start a lawsuit. Chloe, of course, denied everything. She didn't look forward to his visits. That would be ridiculous. She didn't notice when he skipped a day, though she absolutely did. And she definitely didn't replay their conversations in her head while closing up at night. He was just unusual. Unusually persistent. Unusually observant. And maybe, just maybe, a little lonely in a way she recognized but didn't want to name. Still, she couldn't deny that she looked at the door differently now, at 7:59. And every time it opened, every time he walked in, his expression calm, posture perfect, she felt something shift just slightly. Like maybe the routine wasn't only his anymore. Jesse made Bean and Soul feel like a sitcom set, equal parts chaos and commentary. With his ever-rotating collection of vintage band tees, painted nails, and hair that changed color every other month, currently lavender with silver streaks, he was impossible to miss. But it wasn't just the look. Jesse had presence. He was Chloe's favorite kind of person, unapologetically himself, brutally honest, and the best at reading people without them saying a word. "You've got that look again," he said one morning as Chloe polished the espresso machine with more force than necessary. "What look?" she asked, not bothering to deny it. The he said something weird again, and now it's living rent-free in my brain. Look. So, spill. Did Sebastian King finally confess his undying love for your foam art? Chloe rolled her eyes but couldn't help the small laugh that escaped. He asked me if I believed in economic determinism over a macchiato. Jessie blinked. Wow, that's either foreplay or a cry for help. He was her confidant, her human diary. Every time Sebastian said something strange, charming, or borderline infuriating, Jessie was the first to hear about it. And of course, the first to have opinions. Always loud ones. During slower hours, he'd lean dramatically across the counter, stage whispering to nearby customers. She pretends to hate him, but yesterday she asked me what cologne he wears. That's stage 2 of denial, by the way. Or he'd casually narrate their morning battles like a nature documentary. And here we see the alpha exec attempting to impress the sarcastic barista with a poorly disguised compliment about temperature precision. Will it land? Stay tuned. Chloe often responded with a dish rag to the face. Jessie never flinched. But underneath the jokes, Jessie was grounding. He'd been there when Chloe dropped out of school. He'd helped her move into her shoebox apartment when her family left the city. He was the one who first told her she was allowed to be angry, but also allowed to rebuild. So when he teased her about Sebastian, it wasn't just for laughs. He was watching carefully, making sure she wasn't spiraling, that she wasn't falling into something that would break her again. And when he saw the flicker in her eyes, that little light she thought she'd buried, he didn't say much, just smirked and handed her another tray of clean mugs. Because Jessie knew, the story was just starting to get good. It had been years since Chloe last set foot near the business district, but sometimes the memories crept in anyway, uninvited, sharp around the edges. It always started the same way. A sound, a smell, a phrase. This time it was Sebastian's voice the morning before, low and measured, saying something about risk mitigation and interest structures. Cold, clinical words, words that used to belong to her. Late that night, after closing the cafe, Chloe sat alone in the back storage room with a lukewarm cup of tea and too much silence. The hum of the fridge filled the space as her eyes glazed over the wall. Her thoughts drifted back to her second year at university. Back then, she was unstoppable, top of her finance class, interning at a boutique investment firm and being prepped for a fast-track career. Professors had called her a future shark. She'd even joked about building her own empire before 30. Then came the call. Her dad had sounded strange, quiet in a way she didn't recognize. He told her flatly that the house was being repossessed, that the loan hadn't been forgiven, that the refinancing deal they'd been promised had been revoked with barely a day's notice. They lost the house within a month. She remembered the exact day they packed up everything, the boxes, the embarrassment, the way her mother cried without making a sound. Chloe had taken a leave of absence from school, telling herself it was temporary. It was. What made it worse, what made her blood burn even now, was what she discovered later. During one of her restless research binges, she'd found out that their loan had been part of a massive consolidation and foreclosure strategy spearheaded by Linford Capital Management, a name she hadn't thought twice about, until she saw a familiar one listed on the executive team's announcement. Sebastian King, Director of Portfolio Strategy, lead architect behind the firm's Asset Purge initiative. He had signed off on the program that restructured hundreds of small to mid-income mortgages into packaged debt and wiped out families just like hers. The revelation had shattered whatever curiosity or tolerance she might have had for the finance world. It wasn't just impersonal numbers anymore. It was personal. That was the day she decided she wouldn't be part of that system. No more suits, no more spreadsheets full of lies, No more pretending that everything in finance was just business. So yeah, when Sebastian King walked into Bean and Soul every morning with his silent swagger and his obsession with control, it wasn't just annoying. It was a symbol, a breathing, espresso-sipping reminder of everything she'd lost. And yet, it was getting harder to hate him with the clarity she once had. That complicated things. That made her angry in a whole new way. It started with the books. Sebastian had begun lingering just a little longer after getting his coffee. At first, it was subtle, a glance around the cafe, a slow sip, pretending to scroll through his phone. Then one morning, as Chloe was restocking the bookshelf near the register, part of Bean and Soul, "Take a book, leave a book" wall, she caught him staring at the titles. "You read?" she asked, mostly out of boredom, partly out of curiosity. He looked up, surprised. "Is that a real question? You'd be amazed how many people in suits think books are just for shelf decor." He smirked faintly. "Guilty, but yes, I read, mostly nonfiction. Behavioral economics, risk theory, some philosophy when I can't sleep." "That sounds like a thrilling cure for insomnia." He chuckled, a soft, real sound, and stepped closer. "What about you?" "Old Russian novels," she said without missing a beat. "Depressing, dramatic, unnecessarily long. I like the commitment." From there, the cracks in his polished armor began to show. A few days later, they ended up in an accidental late-night conversation. The cafe had just closed, and Chloe had offered him the last cup of overbrewed house blend, joking it was the end-of-day special. He surprised her by accepting, sitting at the counter, looking oddly tired. That's when he told her. "Not everything, but enough." "I don't really sleep," he admitted, watching the steam rise from the chipped ceramic mug. "My mind doesn't shut off. It's like there's a leak in the ceiling, and if I stop moving, the water will start dripping. One drop, then another, then it floods." Chloe stared at him, caught off guard by the raw honesty. This wasn't the Sebastian she knew, the man who barked at baristas for foam, who lived by spreadsheets and precision. This was someone else, someone lonely. "So you work all night?" she asked. He nodded. "Emails, strategy documents, revising forecasts that don't need revising. It's not productive, it just keeps me from thinking too much." She didn't say anything right away. She didn't need to. The silence was strange but not uncomfortable. "I used to think being in control made me powerful," he said after a moment. "Now I think I just confuse control with safety." That struck something in her. She didn't know whether to feel sorry for him or furious that the man who once dismantled her world now sat across from her, exposed and fragile. "You ever consider therapy?" she asked, half joking, half serious. He gave a slow, deliberate shrug. "Every Monday, 10 a.m. Zoom call. My therapist says I'm emotionally avoidant with a high-functioning anxiety complex." She says it like she's proud of the diagnosis. Chloe raised her eyebrows. "She's not wrong." He looked at her then, really looked. Not like a CEO assessing a risk, but like a man trying to understand someone who had just become real to him too. And that was the problem. Chloe felt the shift, the softening, the slipping of old narratives. He wasn't just the suit who signed a paper that ruined her life. He was human. That realization unsettled her more than she expected. Because if he wasn't a villain, what did that make her? The disaster struck at 6:42 a.m. sharp. Chloe was halfway through prepping for the morning rush when the espresso machine let out a wheezing, mechanical groan, followed by a sinister pop and a slow trickle of dark liquid pooling beneath the steam wand. She froze, blinked, then slammed her hand on the counter. "Don't do this to me, Gerald," she muttered under her breath, giving the machine its customary nickname, one that now felt more like a betrayal. "Not today." She tried the reset button. Nothing. She opened the side panel, jiggled a few wires purely for show since she had no idea what she was doing. Still nothing. By 7:10, a line was forming outside. At 7:30, Jesse had shown up, taken one look at the situation, and quietly backed away to hide in the back with a muffin. And at 7:59 on the dot, Sebastian King walked in. She barely glanced at him, eyes wild with caffeine-fueled panic. "No espresso today," she snapped before he could open his mouth. "Gerald is dead." Sebastian blinked. "I'm sorry." "The machine," she clarified, pointing at the inert metal beast. "He died or exploded. I haven't decided which." For a brief second, Sebastian's expression shifted, not in frustration but genuine concern, like losing access to coffee was a personal emergency. "Do you have a backup?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "It's called crying into a French press." He set down his leather briefcase and walked around the counter. "What are you?" she began, but he was already crouching in front of the machine, scanning its innards like it was a surgical patient. She watched, incredulous, as he rolled up the sleeves of his cashmere coat and muttered something about boiler lines. "You know how to fix espresso machines?" she asked, arms crossed. "I don't fix them," he said, peering into the machine. "But I've invested in enough cafes to know when one's beyond repair. This one's toast." She sighed. "That's what I thought." He stood up, dusting off his hands. "Do you want a new one today?" Chloe raised an eyebrow. "You can get me a commercial espresso machine today." Sebastian didn't answer right away. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, tapped, called someone. Within seconds, he switched to a low voice, clipped, professional. "Yeah, it's me. I need a Synesso MVP Hydra 2 Group oat milk ready. Yes, same-day delivery. Use the Midtown warehouse, invoice me directly. Send Gavin if you have to, tell him it's urgent." He hung up and looked at her. "It'll be here by 1 p.m. Chloe gawked. Who the hell has a same-day espresso hookup? "I told you," he said deadpan. "I've made certain investments." Jesse peeked out from the back at that moment, chewing on his muffin. Did he just summon a $20,000 machine like it was Postmates? Apparently. With espresso off the menu until further notice, Chloe and Sebastian spent the next several hours running the cafe in an awkward, caffeine-deprived truce. She handled drip coffee and pastries, while he, much to her disbelief, took charge of managing the register. "I swear if you upsell someone on a scone, I will scream," she warned him. "I've closed billion-dollar deals. I can handle muffins." He was, oddly good at it. Efficient, polite, unnervingly charming. One elderly customer even patted his hand and called him such a sweet young man. Chloe watched from behind the counter, arms crossed, mouth twitching into something dangerously close to admiration. They bickered over the playlist, teased each other about their customer service styles. He made fun of her hand-drawn tip jar that said, "Caffeine isn't free. Neither is my therapy." But underneath the banter was something slower, quieter, a strange rhythm, a flow. By the time the new machine arrived, both of them were exhausted, a little sweaty, and covered in faint smears of chocolate croissant dust. As they stood in silence, watching the delivery crew unbox the sleek silver machine, Chloe finally muttered, "Okay, I'll admit it. You were kind of useful today." Sebastian turned to her with a faint smirk. "You say that like it's hard to believe." "It is hard to believe." He chuckled. "You know, we make a surprisingly functional team." She snorted, "Don't get used to it." But something in her chest fluttered, uninvited, inconvenient, and very much there. It was after closing. The last customer had left, the lights were dimmed, and the cafe hummed with the soft whir of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling into silence. Chloe was wiping down the counter, half listening to a mellow jazz playlist, when she noticed Sebastian still sitting at his usual stool by the window long after he should have left. His latte, long finished, sat cold in front of him. He stared at it like it held answers. "You know we closed 20 minutes ago," she said, trying to keep the tone light. Sebastian looked up slowly, almost like he hadn't realized the time. "Right, sorry, I'll get out of your way." "No rush," she said after a beat, surprised by her own words. She walked over and slid into the stool across from him. "You looked far away." He gave a dry exhale through his nose. "Just thinking." "Dangerous habit," she quipped. But he didn't smile this time. Instead, he looked down at his hands, fingers laced tightly, the way people do when they're holding something in or holding something back. Chloe studied him in the quiet. There was something different tonight. No phone, no headset, no armor, just a man in a suit who looked like he'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. "Can I ask you something?" she said cautiously. He nodded barely. "Why are you always so controlled? Everything's always measured with you, your coffee, your words, your face." There was a long pause. She almost apologized, thought maybe she'd pushed too far, but then he spoke, his voice low and careful, like each word had weight. "Because once," he said, "something really important slipped through my fingers, and I've been trying to make sure that never happens again." Chloe's brows pulled together. She didn't speak, just waited. He looked out the window for a moment, eyes unfocused. "My mother was sick," he said finally. Not in a way that people noticed. She was the kind of woman who held it together for everyone else. Holidays, birthdays, school plays, she never missed anything. But when things got quiet, she unraveled. Chloe felt something tighten in her chest. "I was in college when it got really bad," he continued. "She stopped calling, stopped showing up. My father didn't know how to help her, and I was too busy pretending to have my life together. Grades, internships, hustling towards success." He made air quotes with his fingers. "I missed the signs." He paused, swallowed hard. "She took her life in November, a week before Thanksgiving." Chloe sat frozen. All her usual sarcasm evaporated. "I kept thinking," Sebastian said, his voice almost a whisper now, "if I had noticed earlier, if I had done something, if I had been paying closer attention, I could have stopped it. I could have." He cut himself off and shook his head. "Since then, I've controlled what I can. Every detail, every deal, every goddamn degree in a latte." Silence wrapped around them, soft and heavy. Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came. What could she possibly say? That she was sorry, that it wasn't his fault. Maybe all those things were true, but they felt too small for a pain so large. So instead, she did something rare for her. She didn't joke, didn't deflect. She just sat there. With him. For once, no defenses, no clever remarks, just presence. And maybe that was enough. Because for the first time since she met him, Sebastian looked lighter, not happy, not healed, but just a little less alone. It was supposed to be a normal Thursday. Chloe showed up at Bean and Soul with a fresh playlist, a new bag of Ethiopian beans she was excited to try, and a quiet sense of something like contentment. Things with Sebastian had shifted, softened. Their conversations had grown deeper. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall, more like a bridge still under construction. Uncertain but possible. She stepped behind the counter, humming to herself, only to see Jesse frozen in place, holding his phone like it had personally betrayed him. "Okay," he said slowly, "don't panic." Chloe narrowed her eyes. "Why would you start a sentence like that unless I'm about to panic?" Jesse turned the screen toward her. A headline glowed back. King Capital acquires indie coffee chain, eyes lifestyle expansion market. And beneath it, in sharp serif letters, Sebastian King leads acquisition of Bean and Soul and 9 sister locations. Her stomach dropped. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. The words blurred, rearranged themselves, but no version made it hurt less. She snatched Jesse's phone, rereading the article. It was official. The quirky, independent cafe she'd poured her soul into for years had just become another tile in Sebastian King's real estate mosaic. The bell over the door jingled. Right on cue. Sebastian walked in, coffee order already forming on his lips, but the moment he saw her face, he paused. Something in her eyes froze him mid-step. "You knew," she said, voice low, not a question. Sebastian's expression shifted, surprise, followed by hesitation. "I was going to tell you today." "Oh," she said, laughing, but there was no humor in it. "What were you waiting for? My signature on the dotted line of my own life." "Chloe, it's not like that." She stepped out from behind the counter, fire rising in her chest. "You bought it. You bought the cafe without telling me, without warning. What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking I could help," he said, jaw tight. "The owner wanted to sell, he approached us. I made sure the brand wouldn't get gutted. The staff stays, the culture stays." "But the freedom doesn't," she snapped. "The spirit doesn't. You say it's still ours, but you own it now, don't you? You own the name, the space, my job. You own the thing that gave me a second chance when the world fell apart." His voice was quiet. "I didn't mean to hurt you." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "You always say that it's not personal, not intentional, but your control, it's like a disease, it spreads to everything, to everyone." "Chloe." "No," she cut him off. "You already took a piece of my past without knowing. Now you've taken the present too." Her voice cracked on the last word. He took a slow breath, looked down. "I did it because I care about you. Because I didn't want to lose us, to some soulless corporation that doesn't know the difference between espresso and instant." She stared at him, stunned. "So instead, you became the soulless corporation yourself." For the first time since she'd known him, he looked speechless, truly speechless. Chloe stepped back, hands shaking. "I thought you were starting to get it," she said softly. "That maybe you were learning to let go, but no, you're still clinging, still afraid. And now I'm just another thing you think you can protect by owning." She turned and walked toward the back room, her heart thundering. Behind her, Sebastian didn't follow. He just stood there, alone, in the very cafe he now owned and had already started to lose. The next morning was silent. No banter, no glances, no smirks over the espresso machine. Just tension, thick, unspoken, hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. Chloe had barely said a word since Sebastian walked in. She didn't even look at him. Jesse, sensing the emotional minefield, kept his head down, quietly reorganizing the tea selection like it was suddenly the most important task in the world. Sebastian waited until the cafe emptied a little. Then he stepped up to the counter, voice low but steady. "I want to explain." Chloe didn't pause. She was scrubbing a milk pitcher like it had personally wronged her. "You already did," she replied. "Loud and clear. You bought the cafe because you care. Very noble, very on brand." He sighed. "That's not why I bought it." She finally looked up, arms crossed, face unreadable. "No. I bought it because I believe in it," he said carefully. "Because the numbers were good, because the brand had traction, because the culture here. You built something special. I saw value. And yes, I didn't want to see it stripped apart by some faceless franchise." Chloe stared at him, her voice cool. "So it was a business move." "Yes," he admitted. "So it had nothing to do with me." Sebastian hesitated. "Of course it did." She scoffed, pushing the milk pitcher aside. "Which is it, Sebastian? Either I matter or I don't. Either you bought it for me or you didn't. Don't stand there and sell me a contradiction like it's just another stock option." "I'm not trying to manipulate you," he said, more firmly now. "You mean something to me, but this wasn't about possession. It was about protecting something good before someone else destroyed it." She shook her head slowly. "You still don't get it." There was silence. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her name was scrawled at the top. The ink was still fresh. He frowned. "What's that?" "My resignation," she said. Sebastian froze. "You're quitting." "I won't work in a place owned by someone who thinks protecting something means taking control of it." I'm not the enemy here, Chloe. No, she said softly, but you never stopped being a part of the system I ran from. He stared at the paper in her hand like it was a bomb with no countdown. His fingers twitched, but he didn't reach for it. She placed it on the counter gently. It's already signed. For a moment he didn't speak, didn't move. Then finally, with effort, he nodded once. If that's what you want, he said quietly. It's what I need, she replied. He turned and walked out, slower than usual, like something in his chest had come undone. And Chloe stood behind the counter where they'd sparred, where they'd laughed, where something almost real had begun, and felt a strange emptiness settle over her, cold and final. It had been 3 days since Chloe handed in her resignation. She spent most of that time in a daze, sleeping late, drinking her own terrible French press coffee, and trying not to check the cafe's social media account. Bean and Soul had over 20,000 followers. It used to be her pride. Now, it felt like a window into someone else's life. Jesse had texted her once. The new machine is purring like a damn sports car. The customers miss your sarcasm. Also, Sebastian looks like a haunted Victorian widow. She didn't reply, but she did open the article link he sent the next day. It was from a lifestyle blog called New York Insider, full of glossy photos and smug little headlines. Her eyes landed immediately on one in bold italics. King Capital Sebastian King spotted with ex-fiancée Natalie DuPont. Reconciliation on the horizon. The picture hit like a punch to the gut. Sebastian in his trademark navy coat, standing beside a tall, stunning blonde woman in a sleek white jumpsuit and gold heels, the kind of woman who didn't walk so much as glide. They stood outside a Michelin-starred restaurant, mid-conversation, mid-laughter. Close. Familiar. Chloe zoomed in instinctively, searching for details, the angle of his smile, the way his hand hovered just behind Natalie's back. He didn't look unhappy. Her stomach tightened. Natalie DuPont wasn't just anyone. She was a rising star in tech investment circles, founder of a wildly successful wellness startup, and a favorite in high-end magazines with headlines like, "The woman who does it all without apologizing." She was the kind of person who knew how to network and dominate a room with a single glance. She had degrees, elegance, connections. And she probably never smelled like steamed milk and cinnamon. Chloe closed the article, threw her phone across the bed, and flopped onto her side. She hadn't expected Sebastian to chase her. She told herself she didn't want him to. But something about that article, the glint in Natalie's eyes, the easy posture between them, made her feel like the whole thing had just been a game. One she was never meant to win. How could she compete with that? She was just a girl who used to be a finance major and now made coffee. A girl who couldn't even hold onto the one place that gave her back her dignity. Of course he would return to someone like Natalie. That was the world he came from, polished, strategic, untouchable. Chloe told herself it didn't matter. But deep down it did. Not because she wanted to be Natalie, but because, for one terrifying second, she feared Sebastian might want her back. Chloe hadn't been back to Bean and Soul since she quit. Instead, she found herself most days curled up in the corner booth of a quiet diner 3 blocks away, nursing lukewarm coffee and pretending it didn't taste like regret. Her notebook sat open in front of her, mostly filled with half-sketched diagrams and crossed-out thoughts. No matter how many times she tried, the page just wouldn't cooperate. Her brain, usually sharp, focused, felt dull-edged. She was on her third refill when Jesse slid into the seat across from her, sunglasses pushed up into his lavender curls, and a muffin in each hand like a peace offering. "You look like a sad raccoon who just lost her dumpster," he said, placing one muffin in front of her. Chloe sighed, charming as ever. They sat in silence for a moment. Jesse peeled the wrapper off his muffin, watched her try to form words she didn't know how to say. "I saw the article," she said finally. He didn't need to ask which one. You think he's really getting back with her? She asked, not looking up. Jesse took a bite, chewed slowly, then shrugged. Maybe, maybe not, but does it matter? Chloe gave him a look. No, I mean it, he said, serious now. You're not in this to win a man, you're in this to win you back. She leaned back in the booth, pressing the heels of her hands to her eyes. I don't even know who that is anymore. You're Chloe Bell, Jesse said firmly. You're the girl who once made a spreadsheet to expose a landlord's illegal rent hikes in her building. The girl who hand-built a loyalty app for Bean and Soul because you thought Square was too boring. You're smart. You're stubborn. You're an overachieving softie with barista hands and the heart of a rebel. Chloe blinked. You rehearsed that. Damn right I did, he smirked. He reached over and tapped her notebook. Why haven't you written it down yet? The real idea, the one that's been keeping you up at night. She hesitated. It's stupid. It's never stupid if it scares you. Chloe hesitated, then slowly turned the page and scribbled a title in shaky, uneven print. The Brew Project, a cafe that hires the overlooked. Underneath she wrote, Barista training for displaced workers. Mentorship for at-risk youth. Coffee with a cause. She looked up at Jesse, her throat tight. I was thinking people like my dad, like some of our old customers, folks the system chewed up and spat out. What if they had a place to rebuild? What if we could train them, give them skills, pay them fairly? Jesse nodded, eyes soft. That's the dream, that's you. But I'm not a business owner, I'm not. You're not just a barista, Chloe. He said it with so much certainty, so much unshakable belief, that for the first time in days she felt something warm in her chest, small but alive. Hope. You don't need Sebastian, Jesse added. You need you, and maybe some good legal paperwork and a partner who doesn't try to control your coffee foam. She laughed, the sound coming out rough and surprised. So you're in. I'll be your first hire, he grinned, and I want dental. Chloe reached for her pen again. This time her hand didn't shake. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and anxious ambition. Chloe sat in the back row of the community college lecture hall, her laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The class was called Social Entrepreneurship and Sustainable Impact, and she was surrounded by a ragtag mix of dreamers, nonprofit founders, ex-corporate burnout cases, 20-somethings with more heart than plan, and apparently one ex-barista with a score to settle with capitalism. She glanced at the syllabus in front of her, heart pounding a little too fast. It had been years since she sat in a classroom. Years since she'd felt like her brain was supposed to be here, absorbing instead of surviving. The instructor, a bright-eyed woman in her 40s named Dr. Alina Grant, paced the front of the room as she spoke. A social enterprise doesn't just solve problems. It creates possibilities for people, for systems, for futures that don't exist yet. Chloe scribbled that down, underlined it. At night after class, she'd head back to her tiny apartment and sit cross-legged on the floor with a mess of post-it notes, Excel sheets, and her growing blueprint for the Brew Project. She worked part-time at a neighborhood cafe, smaller, quieter than Bean and Soul, enough to keep her rent paid, but not so demanding that it ate up her focus. It wasn't glamorous. Some nights she came home with burns on her hands and blisters on her feet, but her mind was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. She mapped out everything. Training programs for people re-entering the workforce, partnerships with local shelters and job placement agencies, a sliding scale pay model, rotating community events on financial literacy, resume writing, and small business budgeting. Even a barista mentorship initiative called From Poor to Power. She designed the cafe layout, 2 long communal tables, calming natural tones, a hearing board with staff stories on display like art, a space where people were seen not as risks but as returns waiting to happen. Late one evening, Jesse dropped by, bringing takeout and unsolicited feedback. "I love this," he said, flipping through her sketches. "This part where you turn every customer into a donor with the pay-it-forward board. Genius. Wholehearted but strategic. You're like if Starbucks and a revolution had a baby." Chloe snorted. "That's the weirdest compliment I've ever received." He leaned back against the wall, sipping wine straight from the bottle. "So, have you told him about any of this?" She went still. "No," she said finally. "This has to be mine, no shortcuts, no rescues, no one buying their way into the story." And she meant it. This time, she wasn't running away from the past. She was building something for the future, with her own hands, her own brain, and for people who had been overlooked just like her. She was finally moving forward. One lesson, one sketch, one shot of espresso at a time. Sebastian hadn't seen Chloe in weeks. Not in the cafe, not on the sidewalk, not even in passing. At first, he respected the distance, told himself she needed time, told himself he needed time too. But that didn't stop him from asking Jessie, subtly, awkwardly, whenever they crossed paths. "She's good," Jessie would say, a little smug. "Busy, focused." Sebastian never pressed, though he wanted to. He simply nodded, sipped his drink, and left a tip twice as big as necessary. Then, one night past midnight, in his penthouse office with the city buzzing far below, he came across an email forwarded by one of his venture scouts. It was part of a community pitch competition hosted by a nonprofit incubator. A subject line caught his eye. "The Brew Project, rebuilding, lives one cup at a time." He clicked it and froze. There was her name, Chloe Bell, listed as founder and project lead. He read through the proposal 3 times, heart pounding harder with each pass. It was brilliant, raw, idealistic, but also methodical. The plan was airtight. A cafe that trained, employed, and empowered people failed by traditional systems. Coffee as a conduit for change. Chloe's voice was all over it, even on the page. Honest, unpolished, fierce. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to build something real. Sebastian sat back in his chair, stunned. He knew he had a choice: stay out of it entirely or help without being seen. So he did what he rarely allowed himself to do. He let go. 2 days later, a small LLC named North Hollow Trust submitted an anonymous angel investment to the competition's back-end fund. No names, no calls. Just quiet, clean capital, enough to get her through the next stage. Branding, legal setup, space scouting. He even made sure the funds were routed through a nonprofit microfund so she'd never see the paper trail. He didn't want credit. He didn't want leverage. He just wanted her to succeed. Weeks passed, he never mentioned it, didn't show up to the pitch night, didn't nudge Jessie for updates, but something inside him started to change. For the first time in his life, he trusted someone else with something he cared about, without stepping in, without rewriting the rules, without controlling the outcome. He let the idea grow on its own, like a plant he didn't water but quietly protected from the wind. It felt terrifying, and it felt right. He once believed power came from possession. Now he was learning that sometimes the truest kind of power came from standing back, and believing that someone else could carry it forward better than he ever could. The auditorium buzzed with low chatter, the kind that made Chloe's nerves hum like live wires beneath her skin. The stage lights were warm on her face, far too bright for someone running on 3 hours of sleep and sheer adrenaline. She adjusted the mic, took a slow breath, and looked out at the sea of faces: entrepreneurs, mentors, investors, students. And somewhere in that crowd, she hoped, people who'd once been told no were now learning how to build a yes. She began. Her voice was steady, her slides simple. No flashy graphics, just her story. She talked about her dad, about the foreclosure, about her bitterness toward the finance world, and how it had nearly broken her. She talked about how working behind a cafe counter had shown her what no textbook ever could, that dignity came in small things. Being seen, being trusted, being given a second chance. And that's what the Brew Project was built to give. She outlined the model: training programs, mentorship, trauma-informed management, profit-sharing. She explained how coffee was the gateway, but community was the real product. People don't need saving, she said, her voice gaining power now. They need access. They need the systems that failed them to make space for them to rise. When she finished, the room was silent for half a beat. Then thunderous applause. A few people stood. Jessie whooped from the back row like a proud stage mom. Chloe's chest expanded with something fierce and fragile: relief, pride, belonging. Afterward, she mingled through the networking crowd, a dozen people asking questions, offering cards, promising connections. She tried to absorb it all, smile, stay grounded. Then someone from the event's organizing committee pulled her aside. "Just wanted to say," the woman whispered, "your anonymous investor reached out. The one from North Hollow Trust. He asked to make his name known now, said it felt right." Chloe blinked. "Who?" The woman handed her a folded note. She opened it. It was simple, a name written in neat, unmistakable script. Sebastian King. The world tilted. Her breath caught in her throat, her skin buzzing like it had just been hit by lightning, but from the inside. She looked up, instinctively scanning the room. And then she saw him. At the back near the exit. No fanfare, no suit, just a simple dark shirt, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on her, unmoving, unapologetic, waiting. She pushed through the crowd. He didn't move until she stopped 2 feet in front of him, eyes wide, shoulders tense. "You," she said, barely more than a whisper. Sebastian nodded, quiet. "I didn't want you to know, not unless you made it here on your own." Her heart twisted. "You told me you were done controlling things." "I was," he said. "This wasn't about control, it was belief. I believed in you." There it was again, the rawness. The unguarded Sebastian she wasn't sure how to fight. She stepped back, emotions pulling in every direction at once: betrayal, gratitude, anger, awe. She didn't know whether to slap him or hug him. "That wasn't your decision to make," she said, voice trembling. "To step in behind the curtain like some savior." "I didn't want to be a savior," he said gently. "I just didn't want to be your obstacle." The room around them blurred, everything narrowed to him, to her. To this impossible, infuriating, beautiful thing between them. And Chloe, still shaking, still trying to decide what the hell this all meant, did the only thing that felt honest. She didn't say thank you. She didn't walk away. She just stood there, breathing hard, as if she were trying to build the next sentence out of something real. The rain came in slow, persistent sheets, soaking the rooftop of the old community center where the pitch event had been held. The city below glowed in blurred golds and reds, lights smeared by the downpour, and thunder rumbled in the distance like a warning or a drum roll. Chloe pushed open the rooftop door, her breath visible in the cold. She hadn't planned to follow him, but when she saw Sebastian slip out the back exit during the commotion after her presentation, something in her chest snapped loose. And now here they were, facing each other under the open sky, rain dripping from their hair, their clothes plastered to their skin. Sebastian stood with his back to her, staring out over the city skyline, hands gripping the edge of the rusted metal railing like he was trying to hold the whole world still. She stepped forward, her voice barely above the rain. "You always run when it gets real." He didn't turn. She walked closer. "You help from behind a curtain, you show up without asking, you save but you never stay." Now he turned. Rain streaked his face, blending into the quiet anguish in his eyes. "I stayed." "No," she said. "You try to stay in control, that's not the same thing." Silence stretched between them, thick and wet and full of things unsaid. Then she asked the question she'd wanted to scream since the moment she read his name on that note. Why Sebastian? Why do you have to control everything? Me, the cafe, the funding, your feelings, everything. He looked at her, his eyes dark and tired. And then finally he spoke, voice low, breaking. Because if I can't control it, he said, then I might lose it. She blinked. He stepped forward slowly, rain dripping off his jaw. I spent my whole life believing that control was the only way to survive, he continued. To keep the chaos out, to protect the things I love before they disappear. And that worked for you? She asked, voice shaking. No, he said, because I still lost my mom, I lost you, and now I realize. He stopped, exhaled. I was never protecting anything, I was just delaying the fall. Chloe stood there, heart beating in her throat. Her clothes were soaked, her hair stuck to her cheeks, but she didn't care. This thing between us, she said, quieter now, it only works if it's real, if it's messy, if neither of us is pulling the strings. Sebastian's lips twitched into the faintest, saddest smile. I don't want to pull anything anymore, he said. I just want to stand still, with you, even if it terrifies me. Rain drummed louder around them, but neither moved. And then slowly, Chloe closed the distance between them. She stopped inches away, eyes locked on his. This doesn't fix everything, she said. I know. You still drive me insane. I deserve that. She exhaled sharply, a half sob, half laugh. And then she kissed him. Not like a fairy tale, not like a victory, but like an honest truce between two tired, stubborn hearts, willing at last to stop fighting and just feel. There, on a rainy rooftop above a city that never stopped moving, control finally gave way to connection. They sat side by side on the rooftop ledge, the rain finally thinning into a mist. Chloe's knees were pulled up to her chest, Sebastian's blazer now draped awkwardly around her shoulders, soaked but warm. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence wasn't awkward, just heavy with decisions waiting to be made. Eventually, Chloe turned to him, eyes softer now but still guarded. I meant what I said, she murmured. This, us, doesn't work if you're still trying to control everything. Sebastian nodded, hands folded in his lap. I know. I need to do this on my own, she continued, more firmly now. The brew project has to be mine, built by my choices, my failures, my stubborn plans that maybe don't make perfect business sense. You can't fund it behind my back. You can't protect me from risk. You don't get to be the knight in a tailored suit. He managed a small smile at that. No more secret investments, no more surprise espresso machines. Got it. She gave him a look, skeptical but amused. I'm serious, Sebastian. I know, he said again, quieter. And you're right. You don't need me to build your future. You never did. She blinked, surprised by the way he said it, not bitter, not self-pitying, just honest. He exhaled, looking up at the clouds. I didn't know how to care about someone without trying to fix everything around them. Turns out that's not love. That's fear dressed up in ambition. Chloe looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out, lacing her fingers through his, not as a reward, but as a choice. I'm not asking you to disappear, she said softly. I want you in my life, just not as my safety net. He squeezed her hand gently. I'll be something better. Like what? A balcony, he said, not a net, a place to stand higher, not to fall into. She laughed under her breath. God, that's the most poetic thing I've ever heard a finance guy say. I've been working on it in therapy. They smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. And for Sebastian, something shifted, not in a grand, dramatic way, but in a quiet, powerful one. He'd spent his entire life believing love was something you earned by showing up first, by doing the most, by controlling the outcome. But now, sitting beside a woman who'd built her own fire from the ashes of her past, he understood something new. Sometimes love means stepping back. Sometimes it means standing still. Sometimes it means letting the person you care about take the leap, and just being there quietly when they land. 1 year later, the doors of the Brew Project opened to a line of people stretching down the block. The cafe was tucked into the corner of a renovated brick building in Brooklyn, all clean lines, warm wood, and sun-filtered windows. The front sign, hand-painted in deep forest green, read, "The Brew Project. Coffee, community, comeback stories." Inside, the space buzzed with energy. Not just caffeine, purpose. Laughter rang from the front tables, the smell of cardamom and roasted beans filled the air, and a soft indie playlist looped through hidden speakers. Along one wall, black and white portraits of team members hung in mismatched frames, each with a short handwritten bio. Kevin, 29, first job after incarceration, now training new hires. Maya, 19, dropped out of high school, working toward her GED. Aisha, 36, formerly unhoused, resident espresso queen. Behind the counter, Chloe moved like someone who belonged there. Confident, calm, centered. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, apron streaked with flour and espresso, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She laughed with customers, corrected milk textures with the precision of a surgeon, and guided trainees like a conductor. She wasn't just running a cafe, she was running a movement. Articles had already started to circulate. The Brew Project is changing the coffee game, Forbes. From barista to boss, meet Chloe Bell, the social entrepreneur brewing justice with every cup, the New York Times. But Chloe didn't care about the headlines. What mattered to her was the kid in the corner reading a resume for the first time, the former waitress now teaching others how to steam milk, the neighborhood regulars who left tips and hope in equal measure. And Sebastian. He sat quietly at a corner table most mornings, laptop open, latte in hand. No headlines, no boardroom energy, just a quiet, steady presence, a supporter, not a savior. Sometimes he helped connect Chloe with people in his network, but only when she asked. He never overstepped, never controlled. They'd grown into something balanced. He was the calm to her fire, the quiet to her bold, a partner in the truest sense, not in ownership but in spirit. Jesse still worked behind the bar, now proudly titled Director of Vibes. He ran monthly open mic nights and an unofficial gossip column on the cafe bulletin board. And Chloe, she still worked the morning shift once a week, not because she had to, but because she wanted to remember, to stay rooted. As she stood behind the bar, pouring a latte with perfect art, someone approached her, a teenager with shy eyes and trembling hands. I read about you, they said. Can I apply? Chloe smiled and handed them an application. Of course, she said. This place was built for people just like you. It was a golden morning, the kind where the sunlight poured through the windows like honey, slow and warm and full of promise. The Brew Project was already alive with the hum of espresso machines, the clinking of ceramic cups, and the quiet murmur of conversation. Chloe stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, her hair tied in a loose braid, pen tucked behind one ear. She was multitasking between training a new hire and fine-tuning a batch of lavender syrup when the front door swung open. A young customer stepped up to the counter and smiled nervously. Hi, medium oat milk latte, please. You got it, Chloe said, tapping the order in. Name for the cup. Alex. She nodded, started prepping, and glanced to her right, where Sebastian was, as always, seated at the end of the bar, casually sipping his first latte of the day. No laptop today. Just a newspaper, folded neatly, and a grin that made her want to roll her eyes and kiss him at the same time. She handed Alex their drink and called out, teasingly loud enough for the cafe to hear, Sebastian, you want anything else this morning? besides your daily dose of control? Sebastian looked up slowly, pretending to ponder. I don't know, he said with mock seriousness. I think I'm good on control, but I would like another serving of you. Chloe groaned, even as the corners of her mouth betrayed her. Every morning, he added, softer now, smile warm, with extra sass. From the far side of the counter, Jesse made a gagging sound. Oh my God, someone cut the music, he shouted. We've reached maximum sweetness. Sugar levels are illegal. I can't breathe. A few customers laughed. One girl near the window fake fanned herself. Chloe grabbed a clean towel and whipped it gently in Jesse's direction. You're just bitter because no one wants you with their coffee. Excuse me, Jesse said, hand on heart. I am the cinnamon on this cappuccino of a cafe. Sebastian raised his cup toward him. Agreed. Jesse squinted suspiciously. Okay, that was too nice. What are you plotting? Chloe shook her head, smiling as she turned back to the espresso machine. Her heart was full not just of love, but of something steadier. Peace, belonging, purpose. This wasn't just a business, or a project, or even a dream anymore. It was home. And as she poured the next latte, perfectly balanced, just the right temperature, she looked over at Sebastian, who gave her a small, knowing wink. Chloe grinned. I swear, she muttered, if you ever ask me for a 135-degree anything again, we're breaking up. He raised a brow. No promises. And with that, the cafe hummed on, another ordinary, extraordinary day in the world they'd built together.